Welcome. My name is Brett Gorman, and I realize that it says USRowing, but yeah, Brett Gorman, she, her, and I am the Director of Coach Education for USRowing. What does that mean? It means that it's my job to connect mostly our coaches, but really our whole rowing community with educational opportunities, connect you to the experts, connect you to the people who know what they're doing, are in the know, or are out there doing the work that we want to see happen in order to make our sport amazing. That is my job. And so I'm so excited for the panel that we've assembled for tonight. I also want to introduce Rosa Kemp, who is our coach education coordinator. She will be monitoring the chat and the Q&A. She'll also be putting any links that we need for that. We are going to wait, we think, for the Q&A to come at the end of the program. We've planned about 45, 50 minutes of content, then Q&A. And we will stay a little past the hour if the Q&A is rolling. We'll keep it going, but I think we're going to have a hard stop at 8:15 East Coast. People are busy. We're combining our virtual lives with actual real life now that things are starting to open up, and I hope you're all being safe. But we want to make sure we're giving you some good stuff in a relatively short amount of time. The inspiration for this webinar, so for those of you that were with us in March, we tried to get through a lot. We really tried to tackle this issue of, why aren't we seeing more women in leadership roles in our sport? And what can we do, maybe from looking at the past, to help us get there faster? If you were on, it went 90 minutes. We barely scratched the surface. There was so much more. So for this next one, I wanted to maybe break those three areas up. Where were we? Where are we? Where do we want to go? And how are we going to get there? And so this one, we're going to do a little visit of where were we. Tomorrow is 49 years since Title IX was passed in 1972. And we're going to talk about an incident that occurred that ignited a movement and really made a big difference in not just women's rowing, but women's athletics. And we have with us Mary O'Connor, who was part of the legendary 1976 Yale women's crew. And she's going to be talking about the experience there and what it was like to be a part of that movement. She's a doctor, Dr. Mary O'Connor, orthopedic surgeon, and was also a member of the 1980 Olympic team. Also joining us, we have Mary Mazzio, who was the director of the film A Hero for Daisy. And if you hadn't seen it before, I hope you watched it in the last 48 hours. We made that link available. It's on, is it Vimeo? Is that how you pronounce it? Am I getting that right? Vimeo. For rental, I rewatched it this weekend. I remember watching the movie when I was, 19 years old on a Michigan bus circa 2001 for the first time with my teammates, and understanding what an amazing event that was and how it impacted our sport. So, and then joining Mary, we have A Hero for Daisy's namesake. Woo! Woo! Daisy Mazzio, all grown up. There's a shot of her as a baby with Chris Ernst in her lap, playing with her brother. So it's fun to see her all grown up. But 2021 NCAA champion with University of Texas just a couple weeks ago, woo! Plus 4 years of varsity rowing at Yale, as well as a U23 2018 bronze medalist. So we're really excited to have Daisy kind of representing the new generation and those that are coming through, and want to make sure that group understands this story from 1976 and how the story needs to carry on. And then finally, we also have Francine Chu with us, 2000 Yale grad, who was featured in the film as a current Yale rower, who also is currently a VP at Prudential Financial, and also a member of the Row New York board. Is a board member for Row New York, and doing great things with creating more opportunity in our sport for underrepresented groups. So Francine, thank you for being here as well. We are gonna kick right in. I'm gonna ask some questions. The conversation, might meander a little bit, but we're gonna try to keep it tight. But as you have questions, please put them in that Q&A. Utilize, if it's a specific question to the panelists, please put it in the Q&A. If it's more directed at USRowing, you can put it in the chat, or at USRowing, and Rosa can handle those if they come also. All right, so let's get started. Mary O'Connor, I want to start with you. I mean, this was such a monumental moment, and I have so many questions about it. But you were part of the revolt, in Yale 1976. Can you talk about the conditions and why you guys ultimately took such a bold move? It's interesting in the film how a couple ideas were thrown around that maybe were vetoed, And, how did you end up where you ended up with marching into the AD's office?
Well, Brett, thanks, and welcome to everyone. And of course, I'm delighted to be here with all the panelists. But to get to your question, the issue was, we didn't have any locker facilities. We had this little tiny trailer. We couldn't all shower. We would end up riding on the bus back to campus, which was about a 30-minute ride, cold, wet. People were getting sick. My recollection was Ann Warner got pneumonia. And I mean, Ann and Chris had just been in the Red Rose crew in 1975. I mean, serious elite level athletes. And we were all in this position where we're like, this isn't right. I mean, we should have facilities that are simply better, that are equitable, and it's negatively impacting us and compromising not just our performance, but our health. So it really wasn't a big stretch. And we had the leadership of Chris Ernst, who is just an amazing individual, and Ann Warner, and we did it.
And how did you decide, again, like, I just want to get into a little bit of the nitty gritty there. Like, how did you decide that was good, that you guys were going to go and strip with Title IX? Or do you remember what some of the other ideas were?
No, I actually don't remember the other ideas, because it was kind of like, here's what we're going to do. And there were a few people that members of the team who elected not to participate, which was fine. And we just met in the basement of the Payne Whitney gym. I remember this part very distinctly. And, we had our Yale Women's Crew sweats, and we all met in the basement to basically strip, right, Title IX across our chests and backs, and then put our sweats on, and then walk up the steps to the office of the women's athletic director, where there was an outer room and her office. So we're all gathered in the outer room, and then Chris gives the signal and we strip. And then she reads a statement, and it was such a beautiful statement. Starts off with, these are the bodies that Yale is exploiting. And that was exactly true. And we had a photographer there who took pictures of us from the back, and then of course cropped it from the waist up. And that there was an article in the Yale Daily News, but then when the story was picked up by the New York Times and the International Herald Tribune, that's when things really started to happen, because it was an embarrassment for the university. And I, to this day, have no regrets that we embarrassed Yale. I mean, I love Yale, don't get me wrong, but this is an issue when leadership will not listen to their constituents. This is what happens. And the voice of many is more powerful than the voice of one. If Chris had gone in by herself, it wouldn't have had the same impact as all of us going in. And I think back on that moment and how it has kind of shaped a lot of my passion towards equity, because I do a lot of work in healthcare disparities. And just like, we shouldn't have to accept things that aren't right. And I kind of, my recollection of it was, wait a second, I'm at Yale. Like, I'm at Yale and this is how we're being treated. It's fundamentally wrong. I'm at this endowed institution where rowing has a really strong tradition, and this is how we're being treated. We shouldn't put up with it. We need to make our voices heard. And there had been other efforts prior. I mean, it wasn't like this was a new problem. People recognized that we didn't have adequate facilities at the boathouses, but there had not been any action taken to remedy it. So.
Yeah, no, it's and the ripples that then went out from that. I think the film really articulates that. I mean, you got John Kerry, like you a senator, and on there talking about how far it went. Great. Well, Mary Mazzio, let's go to you. And one thing I forgot to mention when I introduced you is that Mary is right now very much in the midst for the promotion of her latest project, which is the poster and a most beautiful thing. So yeah, she's quite a storyteller. But this was your first film.
Very first.
Yeah. When did you learn about it, and what struck you, and why did you decide to do what you ended up doing with it?
So I was a young lawyer, and I was actually a film student as well, like nobody knew. But before that, I actually lived in a house with Chris Ernst, and I was kind of a rookie in the sport, and she was sort of a veteran. And so I remember she came home one time and told me this story. I think I was about 10, right? And she said, yeah, we did this, that. And I remember, like, I laughed so hard. I'm like, you did what? Like, what were you thinking? This is crazy and hilarious and so badass, like all at the same time. And she's like, yeah, we taught them a thing or two, right? In her typical Chris Ernst fashion. And for me, Chris, and in the making of A Hero for Daisy, which chronicled this event. So I actually did a short on Chris in this event for film school. Nobody at my office knew I was in film school. And I remember somebody came up to me, several people came up, and they're like, this is like, you need to do a real movie on this. And so I remember saying to my husband, like, I'm going to do my thesis film on this. And he's like, why don't you do a real film? And so I had like literally no idea what I was doing other than, you know, some film school, which, like, you know, that'll get you a bag of donuts. Mm-hmm. And what I sort of recollected during the making of the film was how influential Chris was in my own life, right, as an athlete. So here's this extraordinary story. Chris is a little bit of a recluse. Nobody has told this story in any meaningful way. And I was like, what an amazing, as Mary O'Connor said, what an amazing piece of history and a catalyst for so many about what exactly Title IX meant and what it stood for. And this was one of the first skirmishes around what gender equity meant. And it was played out, of course, right, in on the river. Mm-hmm. And, you know, I remember when I was training for the games, you know, I was kind of, I would get cut and I would get cut and I would get cut. And I remember coming home 2 years before the games, and Chris said, oh, you're here. And I said, yeah, I think, you know, I'm not a very good, like, I'm not being a good lawyer. I'm not being a good athlete. And she's like, stop. She's like, you are one of the fastest athletes out there. And until you start to believe, it's not going to happen. And she said, and the second thing is, you make excuses all the time for why you lose. Like, what the F is up with that? And that is Chris Ernst in a nutshell. It was like, woo, this big slap across the face, get your act together and stand up for what you believe in. And because of Chris's leadership, I was able to fulfill the kind of, you know, destiny that I was going to have in the sport. And, you know, it's great. You know, you go to the Olympic Games and it's really meaningful, but that's not what Chris Ernst taught me, or I think the legions of women that come in her wake. It is stand up, have a voice, commit, and commit fully, commit without excuse. And that for me has made me a better filmmaker, a better person, a better mother. And I think to this day, the impact that Chris has had, not just in the sport, but outside of the sport, has been monumental.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, absolutely. And it's amazing how much it has expanded past Yale. Like, it's not just about, you know, it's not just the rowers that go through Yale that know this story. But Daisy, let's go to you, since you're right next to your mother. And, you know, you're the Daisy from Hero for Daisy, which also, fun fact, you know, Mary, you said that more people, it seems, are naming their babies Daisy as a result of that at the beginning. So that's cool. But yeah, what are your memories, both of early on, you know, when were you aware of this story and the legacy of Chris and her Yale crew and Mary? And, you know, kind of how did that affect both your time at Yale and beyond?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I have a pretty unique point of view, having been a Yale rower and a rower outside of Yale also. Mm-hmm. At Yale, I think pretty much everyone either comes into the program knowing this story, or by the end of freshman year, they've heard it. So I think at Yale, like, Chris Ernst and her class loom very large. Mm-hmm. Like, anytime Chris comes to the boathouse, everybody knows, everybody whispers, like, she's really a celebrity on that team. Mm-hmm. And I think part of that is, like, there's photos of her around the boathouse in the erg room. There's a Chris Ernst award So like she's really, her name and her class and this story is really big there. But then I think having run at Texas, I have another added appreciation basically for the work that she's done, where Texas historically has been a football school. And I think if there were no Title IX, a lot of their funding would go just to football. And that having gone to that program, having rowed there, having been like able to take advantage of the resources that they give to just women, I can really appreciate what Chris has done beyond just Yale. And honestly, beyond rowing. I can see like there's scholarships for so many women that they are receiving because of Title IX and because of Chris's work. So.
And did you have any sense, and I know this wasn't in the outline, I'm going off.
She's going rogue.
But it touches on what you were talking about just now. You know, you said at Yale, everyone knows the story. It's part of the fabric of the program. Maybe it never came up, but at Texas, like, did it ever come up? Did people know about it? Like, are you really the Daisy from Hero for Daisy, or was it ever discussed?
Yeah, I think because I'm named Daisy, I think like it comes to mind pretty quickly that people will bring it up and be like, oh, have you heard of this documentary? You have the same name. And then I'm like, yeah, I've heard of that documentary.
Well, that's really great to hear, because I was just in college right after it came out. So, I think we all knew about it. So it's great to hear that the film has continued to educate people on this important event. Francine, let's go to you. And I know we're going to lose you at 8 because you're polling, which is awesome, which is great. But, I'm going to ask you kind of a two-pronged question. I want to start with, same question as Daisy, like, when you were coming through, that's when the film was being done and you're featured in it talking about the legacy of Chris Ernst. But like, when did you first hear about it? Let's start there, and then I'll kind of dovetail off that.
Sure. So it's hard to remember when I first heard about it, because the filming was taking place while I was a junior, I believe. And it came out as my senior year. I think Chris Ernst was just inextricably linked in the legacy of YWC. There are pictures in the locker room, the old locker room. And I'd say it was an interesting time in general. As a bit of context, right? When I came in, it was the fall of 1996. And Wendy Davis was a head coach. We then had Chris Wilson as a head coach, and then Will Porter as a head coach. So it was a time of a lot of transition. And I think some of those stories anchored us. And freshman year, we went to NCAAs, right? Senior year, we went back. And I don't think it was a coincidence that during junior year, when we were filming and really immersing ourselves in the legacy of the history of YWC, this young, scrappy crew of, mostly freshmen and juniors, and this one senior made it back to NCAAs on the wings of sort of those stories and the legacy, right? So it's so inextricably linked. It's hard to say where the story and the inspiration started or ended, but certainly it was present throughout.
Yeah, well, I love that. I mean, and that's really the first chunk of athletes that had an NCAA to go to.
That's right. 1996 was the very first NCAA for women. That's right.
Yeah, so to see, where from, with Mary O'Connor and stripping that sweatsuit off, that, where we got to by 1996. And then, of course, like, we do want to get into a little bit of where else we want to go. And, I think we also want to talk about, how do we consider access, opportunity, not just for women, but women of color, rowers of color, just in general in our sport. That's something that at US Rowing, we've really been addressing with our new CEO, Amanda Krause. And can you speak to your experience at Yale about what more can be done, particularly to retain and recruit, both, getting them to campus, but also while you're already on campus, women of color in our sport?
Yeah, I'd say rowing is not a sport that's, well bandied about or practiced, within communities of color. I was a rower because I went to boarding school, and I think boarding school is a traditional feeder for a lot of rowing programs in college. but the beauty of rowing is that college is a natural entry point. And back in my day, I don't know if we still do this, you used to take shells out and put it on old campus and really sort of accost freshmen. You look strong and tall. Have you considered rowing? Right? There's a lot that we can do to think about rowers of color who are athletes previously, who may be transitioning from another sport, who have natural athleticism, who can pick up the sport. There's a lot we can do to think about bringing cohorts of rowers of color together. So it's not just one lone person, but, you know, even 2 or 3 that can form a community of support. I'd say for me, as a woman of color, I was always aware of the fact that I was one of very few, both in high school and in college. And frankly, part of why I stayed is that rowing was always affirming for me. Sport has this ability to sort of create a level playing field. In some ways, it is meritocracy defined, right? An ERC score is an ERC score. You move the boat, you move the boat. And so in some ways, it strips away all notions of social class or this strange nuance that, you know, can be integrated into speech or language, or where did you go on vacation or things like that, right? But I could compete. And the confidence that I got when I did a great piece and I knew I was a good athlete carried through in other facets of my life. And for me, that kept me coming back to the boathouse. I don't see how anyone is not benefited from having more diversity in the sport. That's partly why I'm a member of, you know, the board of Rowing New York, because more rowers of color should be introduced to the sport. I think it will benefit all of us.
And again, I'm going rogue again, everyone. I'm sorry, I can't help myself. But you know, I run our level 2 course, which we get, you know, we're getting hundreds of people through that coach course. And the thing that I think continues to come up with diversity, equity, inclusion is what's a starting point. And if you were going to, you know, where do you start? Because it seems that, you know, like you were saying before, don't just get 1. If you get 2, you get 3 a cohort. It's a lot easier to grow. It's what the rowers walk in and they see, oh, there are people like me here. If you were going to give advice to coaches at any level, but we can speak specifically to the collegiate, you know, walk on or even recruited, you know, what would be one thing, you know, it's simple, like where would it be a place to start? And I know I'm springing this on you.
No, sure. And I think, you know, working in corporate America, you know, going to Yale even, or even to graduate school, I think all the lessons of being a rower carry through, and you're very much aware of representation and the benefits of rowing, from, you know, teamwork to, you know, grit, perseverance, all of that, it stays with you. So these are questions that I've thought about for a bit. And the thing that I've come to realize is that any gains around equity and inclusion come from intentionality. It's not something that happens because, oh, there's someone who's of color who's here, that's great, we have one. There has to be specific concerted effort towards diversifying the sport. And I think starting with, again, a population of athletes of color, right, who have an experience pushing themselves, being a part of a team, all of the characteristics of good rowers. Maybe they weren't rowers, but they have all of the DNA, in fact, just ready to be activated. It makes sense to start there. That's what I would recommend. And I think having one person always feels lonely, but having a buddy or 2 doesn't, right? Academia has started to bring in professors of color, for instance, in pods, so that you don't have one person just being the lone representative on every committee, et cetera. And I think that would be a tactic that could be employed.
That's great advice. Well said. Rosa, put it in the level 2 outline. Thank you. Great. All right. Well, let's go back to Mary Mazzio. You know, let's talk a little bit more about, you know, we've talked about the ripples, and you mentioned earlier, you know, the wake of Chris Ernst and what, you know, can you talk a little bit of what the film inspired and what kept going? You know, Mary O'Connor, you know, touched a little bit on, how at Yale people took notice after being embarrassed, but the film then, 20 plus years later, what's been the impact?
It's honestly shocking to me in many, many ways, from the sublime to the mundane. I remember there was a Title IX issue at Connecticut College, and we were doing a screening. Either it was at Yale or at Trinity. The film was like screening. It was like this crazy, became sort of like this cult film. And they said, we're going to show up with our parents. We're going to crash like either the Yale event or whatever. And they showed up well-dressed, right? Everybody's like in their Sunday best. And we met after the screening, and they said, we believe that the administration is violating Title IX. We need our own coach. And we had this conversation. Do you follow what Mary did, what Chris did? And I said to them, you're here with your parents. Have you started with a meeting with the president of the college? Like what Mary did, what Chris did, what Ann Warner, what the entire team from 76 did, they actually started on a diplomatic course for about 2 years prior. That went nowhere. And I got an email, I'm getting chills right now. I get a letter about a month later saying, Daisy has there's a hero for Daisy. I want you to know Daisy now has 45 heroes. We stood up, we used our voice like Chris Ernst, like the women from 76. We now achieved X, Y, and Z. And I was like, I got goosebumps, right? That these women were empowered by the message and voicing of Chris. And I think, from the sublime to the mundane, I got a call in 2012, 12 years after the movie came out. And we were making the rounds, by the way. I mean, I remember being shipped out to Minnesota and Grand Rapids, and 1,000 girls, 1,500 girls are in on buses. Like, it was just mayhem. And then I had, there was a parent meeting, and they said, we're really disturbed that our boys are playing on manicured lawns and our girls are playing on landfills. We can't see any of our girls' games because they're in the afternoon when we work, right? So this is like the modern day incarnation of profound inequity. This parent group ended up filing a lawsuit against the Michigan State High School Athletic Association around 2000, just as the movie came out. I get a call in 2012 and they said, hey, remember us? I'm like, hell to the yeah. That was a crazy event. All these, young girls, and there were girls just screaming and hooting and hollering. Mm-hmm. And I said, yes, I remember you were thinking of filing a lawsuit. And they said, well, we just want you to know that Chris's message sparked not only a lawsuit, but 2 weeks ago, the lawsuit went all the way up to the US Supreme Court and we prevailed. Mm-hmm. And I hung up and I burst into tears. And I burst into tears because I was so proud that the strength and courage of not just Chris, but that entire team that dared to have a voice, that dared to make a statement, would inspire such activism and strength and courage. So, there have been all sorts of other data points along the way. I can't tell you the number of Olympians that, like you, Brett, said, I watched your movie when I was in junior high and I decided to row, and now I'm a 3-time Olympian, or, right? And so it's been so exciting to see the message and really the brave actions of that class of 76 that stood up and said, we're not going to take it anymore. And what you did for my generation, what you did, and I'm talking to you, Mario, for my daughter's generation and beyond. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and we're even getting some activity in the chat. Rachel Lemieux talking about, what they did in 1983, and she doesn't say the college. It's very diplomatic of you, Rachel. How they similarly were, fighting for the same rights, and that, we have people ahead that paved the way. Daisy, I want to come back to you. Oh, sorry, go ahead, Mary.
Go ahead.
I know it's yes. Am I proud of what we did? Absolutely. But what really depresses me is the fact that we haven't made more progress. It is this, and I have some level of concern that that young women may not feel as empowered to have their voices be heard. Mm-hmm. And that shouldn't be, mm-hmm. because we should not accept less than what should occur. Mm-hmm. And so, I mean, I see this, it's like a complacency, mm-hmm. or it's a feeling like things are more equal than they really are, mm-hmm. and not wanting to see the inequity and then make a stand about it. Mm-hmm. I mean, one of the most glaring examples, right, was the NCAA basketball women's tournament with the little clip about the weight room. I mean, honestly, how ridiculous is that? How can that happen in today's day and age?
Well, and I think whether it's that, or I think also, and we're going to talk about this a little bit later, but, you know, there have been several programs cut recently. You know, we saw this huge boom, you know, kind of right after Francine, you know, right around when Francine was in school, of rapid growth, and teams were getting added left and right. And then it kind of slowed down, and now we're starting to see, and again, I mentioned already, we'll talk about it a little bit at the end of this. We're seeing some programs cut, and I think whether it's that, the basketball weight room differential, I hope that this webinar also helps to waken people up to that, because I know that when I was in school in the early 2000s, there was a sense of like, oh, we should be so grateful. We should be, for what we have. You know, and maybe not speak up and I don't remember there being a lot of inequity where I went to school, but, you know, anyway, I'm getting off on a tangent.
Well, no, but I think honestly to that point, and I know Holly Hatton's on here, she has a great line in the film, which is, today athletes have more, but mm-hmm. accept less. I mean, Mayor, when you were in the 70s, women were burning bras. The disparities were in your face, the profound, you know, differences between, you know, access and opportunity for women. You could see it and feel it. Today, you might walk into a firm and you are paid the same starting salary as your, you know, XY counterpart, and you don't find out until 10 years later why he's got an extra zero on his paycheck. So I feel like, I'm not sure it's complacency, but because there's been enough evolution where it feels fair, you know, things feel more fair, when in fact, to your point, there's still a lot of work to be done.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think, again, I'm gonna, you know, there were some questions that actually in our outline we decided to take out because we were worried about time, but I think we can touch on them, and this is kind of a natural segue to this, because especially in the chat, we're seeing a lot of talk now about how this crosses over to the professional world as well, the sense of inequity. And, you know, I think we've already touched on a little bit. I actually want to go to Francine, and because you're someone that, like, right now, you're in that stage that Mary Mazzio is talking about, or coming, you know, where you've been in the workforce you're in the prime, you're right in it. You know, what's your take on the parallels that we're talking about when we cross over into the professional world?
Well, the analogy, well, I'm going to speak sort of about two very different things, right? So one is, it happens slowly, the divergence between men and women, or between one group and another, right? Where you may come in at the same level. It's that this bonus payment is slightly more, you know, or you get a slightly different raise, but then because a raise the next year is based on a percentage of what it is the prior year, it compounds over time. And it's sort of like a frog, you know, being in a pot of slowly boiling water where you're like, wait, am I dying? What's happening here? How did we get here? Right? So there's that analogy. And I'd say the tools for us to be able to be more vocal and shift back to the whole bra burning is right there, especially for athletes, mm-hmm. because all of the skills that we develop as rowers, you know, it's this tenacity, it's this collaboration. It's not to be meek, quiet things. It's to use our bodies in ways that people don't regularly. It's to chase an extra second, you know, on an erg test. It's to put hours in just so that you get that kind of a payoff, right? These small margins. And the agility that comes from being able to flex to, you know, a different race and scenarios that crop up, or being able to push yourself or encourage each other. Those are all the kinds of, they're now being dubbed as skills of the future, right? And in the professional world, there's, you know, it's not that you're necessarily technically adept. And that's the thing that people are going to be, excuse me one second. As I mentioned, I'm, you know, in a school working as a poll worker. So there's lots happening around me. But what's being lauded right now as being skills of the future is being able to be adaptable, being able to have grit, being able to understand and flex to a situation. Those are all things that we're learning in the boathouse. Those are skills that we don't leave when we graduate and stop being rowers. Those are things that become embedded in our DNA. And so all that we in some ways have to do is to say, okay, now that I'm aware I need to use this, I'm gonna reactivate that part of myself to X cause, right? So two things. One is we may be a frog in a pot of boiling water, but we have all the skills to hop out.
Mm-hmm. No, love that. No, that's great. And also, and yeah, Mary O'Connor, I was coming to you next. Yeah, go ahead.
1 second. We should never be put in the pot of boiling water, the pot of hot water. So I agree with everything you said, Francine, that you said so beautifully, but we shouldn't have situations where we're going in the pot of hot water.
Yeah, well, that's equity. I mean, that's the definition. No, absolutely. I think we saw in our previous webinar back in March, you know, we touched a little bit on the, you know, Bonnie Mueller, who's the Commodore for Schuylkill Navy, was on, and she also had many years experience working at Korn Ferry. And she brought up a lot of these same points and, you know, what can be done. And, you know, I think we've already started to talk about the voice and how important that is. And when we see something, you know, we say something and that we make a production of it. And Daisy, I do want to come back to you a little bit, especially because you had, not many people get to undergraduate. I know you got graduate school, but undergraduate rowing experiences where you got to compete for 2 different universities, both amazing in their own way. Outside perception is that Texas looks like they have everything they need and looks like they've, you know, they're showing up in the cowboy boots to the matching cowboy boots all together and, you know, all their matching outfits and everything looks shiny and really nice. But yeah, can you speak a little bit about, you know, the dynamic and opportunities for women at both places? And yeah, go there.
Yeah, I think that across athletics in general, there's a real default to prioritize men. And I think that you can see that at Yale, where there's a men's team that's racing right next to us. But I think you can see that at, I assume, every other institution where there's just a priority for like men's football or like men and women's basketball, the men's team will get more spectators, like little things like that. I think it's a problem across just athletics in general. And I think that's present at Yale and it's present at Texas. And I think I was lucky to go to Yale where we had these amazing women to look up to. And I think that is very empowering in itself. And also the boathouse is the Gilder Boathouse, which is named for a woman. So I think that like we as a women's team felt like we own this space just as much as the men own this space, which I'm not sure if every women's crew feels that way. But then at Texas, there's no men's team at all. So the boathouse is just our own space. And I think that is also, so I think I was lucky at both institutions to really have,
And as someone who just completed, you know, the undergraduate rowing experience, and, you know, I know you got a grad degree at Texas also, congratulations. But so as someone who's just gone through it, what do you think current athletes need to do in order to continue to grow the opportunities and be where we want to be?
I think that there just needs to be more support for female athletes. I think that that's something that every college athlete can do. I think most schools, you get tickets to every other event. So if you're going to go to a football game, you should go to a volleyball game, you should go to a softball game. Like a lot of these sports that are getting cut, that one of the excuses is that women's teams don't get enough fans. So I think that's something that everybody can change. Female athletes, male athletes, alums, anyone can just start going to more female events and just supporting the athletes there.
Mm-hmm. And that was a big theme from our March one about, women supporting women. And Mary, I saw you just came off mute, Mary O'Connor. Did you have?
Well, I was just going to point out that Title IX has nothing to do with revenue or attendance at sporting events. It's about equal opportunity for women students to participate in athletics as it is for men. Mm-hmm. So I just point that out to level set us about Title IX and the intent there.
Mm-hmm.
Well, and not only that, but, football and basketball, there's this idea that those programs generate all this revenue. And in fact, only 20% of D1 and D2 programs actually are profitable, which means 80% of all football and basketball programs with rosters that are 3 times the roster size of the NFL teams, right, are losing money. And I think, like Daisy said, right, there's that default position that the men's games, the men's teams are more important. And yet in our own sport, it's an interesting dynamic because you've got 100 D1 women's teams. On the men's side, maybe there are 20, right? And so again, that default is unfortunate because people like, Yaz Farouk, how many national championships has she won? Right now, Dave O'Neill and others that have had to beat 100 teams, right? And so you had, and listen, Harry Parker and others, extraordinarily talented coaches, but only had to beat 20 teams, right? And so there's a really interesting perspective in terms of how they're covered, how much press they get. And I think this all plays into Mary your original point, we shouldn't be in the boiling water in the first place.
Mm-hmm. I think the other thing that I'll layer into this is that I think the way Title IX is written, it's to provide equal opportunity and access. And for some reason, the interpretation was that meant dollars allocated, which is an important component, but not the only component. Mm-hmm. And you can support and nurture women's sports without necessarily looking only at revenue streams. And I think that's a very narrow, myopic view of what equality and access is.
Mm-hmm. No, absolutely. And actually, this is a very good lead in to some of the questions that have come in to the Q&A, because we're kind of, we're talking about, a lot of with, how the interpretation and dollar and how a lot of that is interpreted for Title IX with dollars. The question is that I'm going to put it to all of you, so whoever wants to speak up, but, do we see a parallel in what happened in 1976 with Mary's teammates and the NCAA fight that's going on right now in the Supreme Court, actually, that just happened, which was, was about Supreme U.S. versus Alston for the name, image, and license. Do we see any parallels? And that was, and that one just happened just recently.
So I'll just venture into this because Grant Hill, who NBA star, he and I have been tied at the hip. He's actually on the board of governors for the NCAA, and we've had great discussions. I think it's slightly different. Mm-hmm. The reason being name, image, and likeness. As Grant said to me, Mary, collegiate basketball, collegiate football is primarily made up of Black and brown athletes. And these are athletes that are denied agency over their own image. And he didn't use the word exploited, but that this really has to be rectified. So I think it's a fight in a different context, but it's very much, I think, in that vein.
Mm-hmm. Well, and then let's shift back to, Title IX, especially as it relates to women's sports. We've got another question in the chat here, and there's a lot of text here, but it's about, how actually there are lots of teams that are not compliant, and there are a lot of over 90% of colleges are not compliant with Title IX. Every school that has cut a women's sport due to COVID has reinstated the sport when threatened with a lawsuit. The NCAA doesn't enforce Title IX and knows the schools are not compliant. How can we force schools to become compliant? What are things that can be done?
So I would say that in addition to the students banding together to speak, as we have seen student demonstrations in various colleges where sports are being cut, it's important to also engage their parents and the alums, because colleges want to continue to have loyal alumni, an alumni base for donations, etc. And so, you know, it's like that old adage, you know, money talks, and you know what else walks. Okay, so if you get people mobilized to say this sport matters, and I'm going to be very upset with my alma mater if you cut out my sport, and that means I'm also not going to donate any more money, then your voice is amplified. So it's making sure that people empower themselves to say, it's not okay. What's happening to us is not okay, right? And we can even look at the disparity in women's rowing with lightweight rowing. You know, why don't we have more lightweight programs for women? Resources, okay? Is it that there aren't women out there who want to compete at the lightweight level? If you look at the population numbers, okay, there's lots of women out there that would be able to be competitive in the lightweight field. So I see this as simply groups are not willing to invest the resources to have lightweight teams. I think that's negative for our sport. The more people that we have rowing, the better off the sport will be. And it's a great sport. I mean, why wouldn't, of course we want to grow rowing. It's absolutely fabulous.
I think the other challenge with schools being out of compliance is that the remedy is that all federal funding will be pulled, right? So you have this huge hammer that the Department of Justice and right, others are really loath to say, I am going to remove all the Pell Grants. I'm going to remove every indicia of federal funding because you have 93 athletes and you should have had 92. So I think I've been thinking about this, and certainly when we did a Hero for Daisy, there was so much discussion around Title IX, and that's one of the really interesting elements. You have such a heavy hammer, no one wants to use it, which is why you have to resort to the threat of a lawsuit to have any sort of real action. And maybe that's right, but if you had differing penalties, you know, you may be able to incentivize more compliance. I don't know the right answer to that, but I just think that's an interesting data point.
So Mary O'Connor, you're advocating for pocketbook rather than embarrassing protest for universities.
You know what I'm advocating for? I'm advocating for efficacy. Make it happen, get it done. Mm-hmm. You try the diplomatic route first, always. Right? Because that's what we should do. We should go and have thoughtful conversations with people to try and sway them to action, to address whatever the inequity is. Mm-hmm. At times, if that doesn't work, then you have to make a decision. Are you going to tolerate this treatment? You shouldn't. Mm-hmm. And then you got to step up your game. That's what we did. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, I see that there continues to be a need for women to speak up, to say, we should have equal facilities, we should have equal coaches, you know, in terms of their salaries and their compensation. We should get the same number of scholarships for the women's team as the men's team receives. There's mm-hmm. lots of inequity with that. Mm-hmm. Because why shouldn't we? But if you don't speak up, it will continue the way that it is. Mm-hmm. So yeah, then you got to up your game. Get parents, get alums involved. If that doesn't work, you know, figure out your demonstration. Then you have to get your voice heard, and however, you know, whatever means is required, because otherwise you are accepting the status quo and you are diminishing yourself as a person. And you're not helping us to improve society. Mm-hmm.
And then I'm going to segue into another question that we had here. What about the role of our coaches? Our coaches that are coaching at these universities and are coaching our collegiate women. And, you know, how can we build more representation for college coaching? So many men coaching women. And number one, do we see that as an issue? And number two, you know, how do we get it to change? When I think the stat that we covered in the last webinar was 70% of rowing staffs are female, but only a much smaller percentage. I think it was, I don't want to say a number, but it was way smaller, was the head coaching positions. And that's what we addressed in the previous one a little bit about, you know, the upper echelons of leadership with that. What's the role of our current coaches?
Brett, I'm just going to put out there, I want to ask the question, why don't the men's team have more women coaches?
Yeah, you read my mind, Mario.
All right. I mean, why is it that we're also not asking that fundamental question?
Good point. Great point. And Daisy, did you have something to add in on this?
Yeah, this is kind of on a different note, but I was coached for the past 5 years, predominantly by men. And I think that both of the men that I worked with made like a distinct effort to empower women. And I remember Will Porter, the current Yale coach, would have a lot of like after practice speeches where he would talk about like how we need to use our voice and how we're strong women, and being an athlete and being a Yale athlete in particular gives you a unique like voice in the world. But I do think that it is empowering to see somebody who's like you in a position of power. So there should be more female head coaches definitely in the sport. And I think it's a shame that when you look at the NCAA, you have to like really think to find the female coaches. And men's coaches, I could easily list 10 off the top of my head. Women, I could list 3, I think, which is definitely an issue, I think.
Sure. Well, I think we've come to actually a pretty natural time frame where, you know, we were talking before about, you know, how the fight needs to continue. This is part of the title of the webinar, and how it's ongoing, and that recently maybe we've had some realizations that, oh, wow, it's not as equitable as maybe some of us thought. What about, you know, the current programs? We have had several, as I mentioned, several that have been cut. San Diego State University, Nova Southeastern, Ohio Wesleyan. We saw Stanford cut both men's and women, you know, women's lightweight and men's open weight, and band together and make a lot of noise together with, I think there were 11 sports total that were all cut, and they were thankfully reinstated. But actually we actually are going to bring on another panelist. We're going to bring on Maggie Milanek, who is the team captain at UConn, which is another program that is slated to be cut, and they were able to compete this year, but the plan is that they will not come again in the fall. I'm going to elevate her to panelists, and she's going to talk a little bit more about, you know, what's going on with them. She can't get into a lot of details because they are in mid-lawsuit. But if I go ahead, so I think you should have gotten that invite, Maggie. Oh, here she comes.
Hello, everyone.
Hi, Maggie, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
Of course. Yeah, no, we'd love to hear a little bit about, you know, how it's going for you guys. And we know you can't get into too many details. And if questions come in the chat, you know, I'll try to handle them, because I know that you want to be careful not to say more than your lawyers say you should.
Yeah. So hi, everyone. My name is Maggie Milanek. I was one of the captains of the women's rowing team at University of Connecticut this past year. As you may know, our program was cut last June. However, we were given this last year to compete, during which we learned all about Title IX and how it applies to our situation. And actually in April, 11 of my teammates and I filed a class action lawsuit. Because we're currently in the middle of our case, I unfortunately can't give any further details. However, on behalf of my team, I just really wanted to thank you all and the rest of the rowing community for supporting not only our efforts for reinstatement, but the cause as a whole. Through attending events like this and learning about Title IX and its history, we as a community can really be better prepared to respond to gender inequality in collegiate athletics. And yeah, so thank you to Mary O'Connor, Mary Mazzio, Francine, and Brett for really paving the way for us. And thank you to USRowing for putting this together for this webinar for the community. And lastly, thank you to everyone for attending, because this fight is bigger than just one team. So thank you all.
Yeah. And if you are interested, and I don't know if you can put it in the chat, Maggie, but if you're interested, they do have a GoFundMe that Maggie can now utilize, because she's graduated when she was still a student athlete. There are NCAA rules with that. So if you wanted there, great. Thank you, Rosa, on it. Also, another organization that I spoke with I was on the phone with Bill Zach from San Diego State University, and he said that an organization that has been very helpful to them is the Women's Sports Foundation, where they provide a lot of great information on advocacy and can even connect teams with lawyers. They are a very amazing organization. Rosa just put their link in the chat. If you want to get involved, they of course they do accept donations, but they do more than that. They do so much more than that in terms of if you want to get involved in this fight. And, I remember I think it was on a CRCA, Collegiate Rowing Coaches Association call that I was on, B.B. Bryant speaking about, it's time again. It's time to rise up. It's time for us to all band together and realize, what we need to do to keep this sport that we all love so much alive and keep it going. And, I think we've done a great job of keeping us within our time. I would like to go to our initial panelists one more time, just for some final thoughts. Francine, because I know you have to go. Let's go with you first.
I think we're at a point in time when, unfortunately, it feels like there have been enough signs that there's a big retraction in women's sports across the board, that that it requires us a good number of us to say, look, we have now an impetus to actually care and care more than we have before, and act and advocate. Women's sport is more than just athleticism and a river or a basketball court, etc. It's all of these other life skills that go beyond our time as athletes. Do we ever stop being athletes, actually? Someone in the comment made a comment in the chat that said it goes beyond rowing. It's really trying to engender more female representation in sport at the university level. Completely agree, which is why we're having a conversation about Title IX and rowing as an example of really pushing Title IX and having greater representation. I think as a Black woman, I'll say that, it's more than just gender. While we think about having change, let's think about inclusively embracing more than just gender norms, but rather thinking about how do we really get to a more equitable place and ask for more than just one thing at a time.
Wonderful. Thank you, Francine. Mary O'Connor, we go to you next.
Well, thanks, Brett. I think I'll close with why I think rowing in particular and sports in general is so important for girls and young women. And it's because, and Francine commented on this earlier, it's the skills that we learn in sports, particularly team sports, that help us be successful throughout the rest of our lives. And whether that's in your family life or whether it's in your professional life, these are the skills that our society enculturates boys to learn much earlier than girls. And girls learn them when they play on teams. And I'll just give you a brief example because maybe somebody's listening and saying, that doesn't make any sense. Girls, we are raised, at least in this country, to play dolls together, to all play nice in the sandbox, okay? And boys are raised to recognize that there's a quarterback on the football team, and the quarterback gives the directions, and you follow the directions, and that you win and that you lose. And some weeks you win and some weeks you lose. And girls are not socialized in that way. We're socialized that everyone is more equal and there's no winners or losers. We're all playing nice together with our dolls. But that is not how life is. And learning how to win and how to lose and how to work together as a team and how to focus on being your best. I mean, all the things that we learn with rowing is so important in life. So I feel so passionately about the power and value of athletics for young girls and young women. You know, it should be like required. It shouldn't just be an option. Like everyone should have to do this. I mean, optional for the boys, mandatory for the girls. I'll stop at that.
Sounds good. All right, Mary Mazzio and Daisy.
Honestly, I feel like the conversation we're having today is about Title IX. But to Francine's point, what I think what her message is stand up and have a voice when you see injustice, when you see inequity. And that's the point. And, you know, certainly early in my business career, before I became a filmmaker, women often were not strong mentors, right? As Mary was saying, we are thrust in this hierarchical world. We only want to talk with people who are our friends, right? And boys are socialized. You don't have to be your friend. You can go out for a beer and, right, you're a teammate. And I think for us to truly advance collectively and singularly, we need to be better mentors. Stick a hand down, be more supportive. The Ncaa chat, we all should be writing a check, right? To support that team and other teams. And some people can write a check, some people can use their voice, some people can call a senator. We all have a role to play. And I think that for me is the message of Chris Ernst. Stand up, be a sister, be a friend, and have the courage to say uncomfortable things when you see inequity. And to Francine's point, be intentional.
Mm-hmm.
Amen.
Mm-hmm. Daisy, what about from you?
Yeah, I think I want to end by just saying thank you. I think I'm extremely lucky to have been raised by my mom and to be a part of this sport. I think there are very few people my age that can say they have the same like strong role models that I've been so lucky to have. And I think being able, to be a rower, go to row for Yale, hear this story, row for Texas, like all of it. I'm so lucky. So.
Yeah, and you guys, a theme that seems to keep coming, whether it's women supporting women, mentorship, which is the same thing in a lot of ways. You know, and actually I wish I'd had the foresight to create a poll from our participants, from our attendees. I would really love in the chat, and we will save the chat, I would love to hear from you guys on what you want next. What is the next step for us? You know, I said we wanted to break it down. We touched on history. We touched on kind of some of the milestones that we've hit. And now we've given some tangibles of, okay, what do we need to do? We need to use our voices. We need to band together. That's another theme I heard you all talking about, whether it was Francine talking about when you're bringing, you know, BIPOC athletes into the boathouse, you know, create a cohort, create coalition. It can't just be one team, one person, one coach, you know, and so I love this networking thing. But yes, please put in the chat what you want to hear, where we want to go. I have ideas, but I want to make sure that I'm not the only one making these decisions. The last thing I want to say is that Maggie, we are with you. We stand with you and your team and anyone else that's in similar fights. You know, we want to do this. We want to help. Please let us know how we can, whether that's sending us the fundraising links. We can promote those. I can't send you a big check from USRowing at this point, but I can help provide a platform, and we can give the megaphone to the people that can get the word out. And that's you wonderful panelists, all of you. Thank you so much for being here. Please, people, use the chat. I'll stay on. What do you want to hear about? What topics interest you? But we're right 5 past the hour. Francine, thank you for staying with us. Oh, there she goes. She's going to poll. But thank you so much for being here. Everyone else, I know it was shorter than we normally do. We're trying to be respectful of your time and know we've all got a lot going on. So thank you so much. We'll see you next time.